Kia ora. Thank you, Philippa. It's just really exciting to be here for this first ever combined Museums Australasia conference. I feel like it's been a long time coming. We've finally convinced our maybe more famous cousins on the other side of the Tasman to come across and visit us in our house. And we can get to share some of our legendary pavlova, although I'm not really sure whose pavlova it actually is. I'm glad that Vernon have been able to help out with this conference in a small way in our hometown. I think a lot of Australian and New Zealand museums are actually sharing the same challenges. So take advantage of this moment when you're all together in the same room to actually talk to each other. Museums are currently under threat from multiple different sides. We live in a world where Wikipedia has more detailed pages than what most museums can produce about their own specialist subject areas. We live in a world where a government thinks that cutting Trove, an internationally acclaimed research and education resource, is somehow going to be good for the country. We live in a world where the general public thinks that curators are people that group together kitten photos on Pinterest. We live in a world where museums are increasingly competing with the film, game and music industries as a source of entertainment. And I think on top of that, there's a primary challenge of how do museums stay relevant in this changing landscape. One of the projects that I've been particularly impressed with over the last couple of years is the Douse Art Museum's Wikipedia project. They've taken their expertise and their archives, and they've created pages on Wikipedia for individual New Zealand craft artists. And I think that's been a really good way to balance the resources that they have and get that knowledge out where the most people can make use of that. By putting our resources online, we keep museums as a resource that people turn to. Museums should be moving to where the conversations are now taking place. Earlier in the year, we did a survey of nearly 100 Australasian museums looking at how they shared their collections online. A third of those had none of their collections online, none of them. The remaining ones, half of them shared only their highlights, and only 1 in 5 was sharing with national initiatives like Digital NZ. Making those collections more accessible helps keep museums as a destination. Be part of projects like Trove, help continue to demonstrate the social and economic benefits that they provide. Last year I was fortunate enough to go and attend the David Bowie touring exhibition that was at the Australian Centre of the Moving Image. It's an exhibition that combines personal stories, objects and multimedia. And for me, it's an exhibition that succeeded as both blockbuster entertainment and as an in-depth history of Bowie's influences. It's an example of what museums can achieve. Telling engaging stories, supporting those stories with real objects, and most importantly, providing a place where others are encouraged to tell their own stories. So I think despite all of the changes in the last generation with technology, museums still have a really important part to play. They still have an ace card, in my view. They have rich, unique collections, and they have experience in what makes those collections significant. Collections will continue to be important in our future, provided people can access the knowledge about those collections when they want to, where they want to, and have the ability to reuse that information. Enjoy the conference this week and take advantage of the conversations that it sparks. Thank you, and good luck for the week.
Good afternoon, everybody. I think my voice is recovering slightly. It's Frank Howarth here again. Welcome back to our after-lunch session. We realise we have a hard act to follow up here after those two opening plenaries, which were just astounding, but we're going to do it. Those two plenaries were in many ways provocative, and this specific session is about provocation. We're going to hear 6 different provocations in 7-minute slots. And the idea behind the session is that our speakers' words give you something to think about, something to talk about over the next few days, something to provoke a way of looking at the conference and a way of talking at the conference. Each speaker, as I said, has been asked to speak for 7 minutes. We're not exactly going to follow the order up there on the screen. We're going to ask Lisa to speak last because she will have a video. The sequence will be Bob Janes first. For Australians, it's risky standing up here saying Bob Janes because there's a prominent tyre retailer in Australia called Bob Janes. This is not the same one. We're having a video presentation from Bob, which I'll explain in a minute. Then we'll hear from Elizabeth, then Daryl, then Peter, and then Albert, and then Lisa. Kicking right along, for many of us who've been around the industry for a while, Bob Janes is a bit of an interesting figure. I was trying to figure out if there's an older version of enfant terrible, because Bob epitomises that. He's become a sort of a creatively, pleasantly, curmudgeonly stirrer around the museum sector. He was long-time editor of the magazine Museum Management and Curatorship. Held many positions. I'm not going to go into those. He's talking to us via a pre-recorded video for reasons he will explain during the video. So if we can run Bob's video, thank you.
Thank you very much for that kind and generous introduction. I'm delighted to be with you, albeit remotely. My decision not to travel was most difficult as I've never been to New Zealand, and I know that I would have benefited enormously by participating and experiencing your wonderful country. Canadians agree that Canada is simply a larger version of New Zealand. I've been asked to provide a provocation, although a provocation is an action or speech that deliberately makes someone annoyed or angry. I want to avoid this as your guest, so I will present a manifesto instead. I believe that the global museum community must now take a stance on climate change, along with concerted action as advocates of both awareness and mitigation. This is now a moral imperative for museums, as climate change is no longer about science or politics, it's about social justice. We've now passed the milestone level of 440 parts per million of climate warming carbon in the atmosphere for the first time in human existence, without even an outcry by the citizenry. The 400 ppm threshold is a dire wake-up call, and our profound global challenge is to reduce our carbon emissions by 80% by 2050 in order to forestall the worst impacts of climate disruption. Judging by the results so far, we are failing miserably. What is the museum's community excuse for its reluctance to address this issue? I suggest that it lies in the claim of neutrality. There's a widely held belief that museums must protect their neutrality lest they fall prey to bias and special interest groups. The unspoken argument is that museums cannot risk doing anything that might alienate their audiences or sponsors, real or potential. This claim of neutrality has conspired to create a magical belief that is now the stock and trade of most museum workers. This belief is that museums may abstain from addressing societal issues and aspirations because they have complex histories and unique missions which absolve them from greater accountability. Why should museum workers part company with the time-honored protection of neutrality? The first reason is that each of us is a sentient being on planet Earth, and each of us has a personal responsibility to confront the reality of climate change and protect the planet upon which we depend. Second, we know as museum workers that education is a core mission. But what sort of education is appropriate and necessary now? What we actually need are museums that identify and challenge the myths and misperceptions that threaten us, such as the false belief that continuous economic growth and consumption can continue. The third reason for rejecting neutrality is that each of us is part of a family, a son, a daughter, a brother, a sister, a parent, or a grandparent. With this in mind, for how long would we like our family to continue? If the next generation matters to us, and the children born to it do as well, then what about their children's children? In addition to their larger view of time, museums are uniquely qualified to embrace climate change and other critical issues because of several unique characteristics. They are grounded in their communities and are expressions of locality. They are a bridge between science and culture. They bear witness by assembling evidence and knowledge and making things known. They are seed banks of sustainable living practices that have guided our species for millennia, and they are some of the most free and creative work environments in the world. In short, there are no other organizations with this singular combination of historical consciousness, sense of place, public accessibility, and unprecedented public trust. How then can these precious qualities translate into concrete action? Here are two simple initiatives. Tell stories and educate. Museums tell the stories of the natural and cultural world. Tell your visitors how climate change and disruption came to be. Second, with unbridled consumption as the cause of climate change, it's imperative that we reduce our individual consumption. Museums can readily assist with this task through information, dialogue, and advocacy. Did you know that the carbon footprint for a return flight from my home in Canada to Auckland is 5.66 metric tons? That flight alone represents 1/3 of the average Canadian's annual carbon footprint, and that's why I'm not with you today. All of this leads me to one unavoidable conclusion. Individual museum efforts to address climate change are laudable and essential, but they are not enough. Nothing less than a global museum movement is now required, and the resources of the world's 55,000 museums must not only be mobilized, they must be anchored in a new story. We all agree that museums exist to tell stories about people, communities, and nations. But who is telling the story of the 21st century? Corporations and governments are, but it's the story of ceaseless economic growth. The rhetoric is agonizingly familiar and destructive. Consumption means happiness, economic inequality is unavoidable, and rampant environmental damage is regrettable. Although we know that this story is false, it is the predominant story in our public lives, and it defines our common future. This story, however, is destroying the planet upon which we depend. Humanity needs a news story, and museums need a news story. We must move beyond the doomed economy of industrial growth to the recognition that the connection between individuals, communities, and nature is the key to our well-being. It's incumbent on all museums to help envision and create this new narrative with their communities using their unique skills and perspectives. A fundamental question as the destruction of the world proceeds is the fate of our social and cultural enterprise. Will it diminish or wither away along with every last lump of coal and every last ton of tar sands? Most importantly, what is the role of museums in charting a path to sustainability that will preserve and use our irreplaceable cultural legacy? Like it or not, this question lies at the heart of contemporary museum governance and management. In conclusion, I want to leave you with two additional questions to ponder. I hope that these questions will help guide your thinking and your work as global challenges deepen. First, why do we believe that museums may abstain from addressing societal needs and aspirations and be absolved of greater accountability, especially at this time of extraordinary societal upheaval? And second, what is your museum's higher calling, meaning the public value you wish to contribute to your community and the world? I look forward to your thoughts, and thank you very much for listening.
Bob will be doing a live from Canada Q&A session on Wednesday at 10:45. It's session W2A7. So if you'd like to engage with Bob or respond to those very significant issues he's raised, go along to that session. Our next speaker is Elizabeth Merritt. When I joined the museum community about 12, 13 years ago now, one of those figures that really hit me very quickly as an influential thinker about the now and the future of museums is certainly Elizabeth. She's founding director of the Centre for the Future of Museums and is Vice President, Strategic Foresight, I'd love that title, at the American Alliance of Museums. Elizabeth.
And I'm starting my timer. I'm serious about staying on time. I want to thank Bob for hi Bob, thank you, for queuing up our provocations so nicely. I absolutely agree with him. Museums have to think about their moral imperative to change the world. My own informal motto at CFM is museums can change the world. But the limiting factor on that is our ability to actually reach people, either by going to them or having them come through the doors, by having them care about us, by having them listen to us. And my provocation today is framed around 3 numbers that make me very disturbed about our ability to do that. I'm a research person, I'm a numbers person, I love the stories they tell, and I'm very disturbed by some of the dark imaginings that are prompted by these 3. So, the 3 numbers I have chosen to share with you are, first of all, 5. 5%, in fact, which is the percent of people in the US who go to museums because they absolutely identify with the museum mission and are passionate about museums. 5%. That's pretty sad. There's another 25% who come as what Reach Advisors, and Reach Advisors, Museums R&D is the source of these data, call utilitarian visitors. They have a particular use in mind. They want to find a place to spend with their 3-year-old, and a botanic garden is a good place where a little kid grabbing can't get in trouble. Or they're studying for their finals, and they have a place where they want to look at the paintings they're going to be tested on. Utilitarian visitors, they'll come as long as we serve their needs, and then they'll stop. Another 20% of people come occasionally because, hey, museums are okay, might be a good place to go for the holidays when the family's in town. That overall is only 50% of the US public who come at all, the remaining being ranging from indifferent to hostile. I find that very disturbing. If only 5% of people in the US, you'll have to fill in the blank for the equivalent figures in Australia or New Zealand, deeply care about us and our missions and what we can do, how far can our influence really extend? Well, why only 5%? This brings me to the next of my 3 numbers, which is 80. 80% again. 80% represents the graduating class of museum studies students in the US who are white. It also happens to be the percentage of museum studies graduates who are female. Our field is largely recruiting from a pool that is 80% white, 80% female, and those figures are reflected throughout our demographics, though of course as you go up in the size of museum and up the hierarchy, the equivalent figures trend male, yes, yeah. I was trying to find a nice way to say that. Yeah, big museums with big salaries have male directors. Still white though. This is a problem. How much credibility can we have? How much insight can we have into the needs of our communities, into their concerns, into the ways they see the world, into the problems they want to solve in the world, unless we reflect those communities? And also that 80% white, 80% female demographic is creating a negative feedback loop of low salaries and high barriers to entry. So as long as we have people who, for the most part, come from economically advantaged families, underbidding each other for the sake of taking a low-paying museum job, we're going to be a non-lucrative profession, where you have to spend a lot of money to get the degree that let you have an unpaid internship that in turn might get you a job in the museum community. This is not a recipe for diversity. And this has me thinking that we have to deconstruct our assumptions about how we hire, about how we read resumes, about who we want to recruit into our institutions and what constitutes training. So that 80% and that 5% put together make me think about a system in which we tell museums, you know what, the way you should be hiring is going to your community and finding bright young people who think you're a great place and say, come work for us. And once you're here, we'll figure out how to get you trained. Maybe one of the roles of national associations is to help you find that training. Oh, you've just hired somebody to be a registrar. We notice there's a good training course in this summer, not too far from you, and there's a great online course from the Metropolitan Museum or the Museum of Victoria that will fill in some of those gaps. And as that young person amasses pieces of training, we'll help certify them and recognize their accomplishments to help promote their career throughout museum ranks. That might be the kind of reformation we need to change the stories told by those numbers. The final provocative number I want to present to you is 12. 12%, again, is the percentage of the US population who, when asked to talk about museums and what they think museums are, use the word educational in any way, shape, or form. Yes, only 12% of the American public think of museums as educational organizations. Considering that the American museum community has always founded our identity in our role as educators, and in fact, about 30 years ago made it a hallmark of being a museum when we published Excellence in Equity, it's incredibly disturbing that only 12% of people think of us as educational. So my last provocation is, instead of doubling down on trying to be thought of as a place to be taught knowledge, as a place to go for teachers, we should look at our role in inspiring creativity and awe and wonder and love and engagement. Instead of trying to be teachers, maybe we should be lovers. Maybe we should be less concerned with facts and didacticism and more concerned with flirting and being funny and attractive, all for the purpose of having people fall in love with our resources, spark their imagination and curiosity. Now, the last figure I'm going to sneak in here is again from Reach Advisors, Museum R&D. When you talk to people in that 5% who love museums, who are passionate about museums, almost every single one of them has a clear memory they can remember from being a child, somewhere around the age of 7 years old, where a museum just bowled them over. In my case, it was standing in front of a terrible fish skeleton in the Cleveland Museum of Natural History when I was a little kid and peeing my pants because it scared me so much. But it was an impressive memory. So what can we be doing to get kids at a very young age into our organizations to have those awestruck, immersive, passionate experiences that have them grow up to be museum lovers, to be museum advocates, and in turn to be the pool of people we can influence as we try and change the world? Thank you.
Our next speaker is Daryl Carp. Daryl is Director of the Museum of Australian Democracy in Old Parliament House in Canberra. Presents a range of interesting challenges, a little bit too close to politicians for my liking. But Daryl has a background in media and film and television and brings a very particular and wonderful view to the sector. Daryl.
Thank you, Frank. I will say that the figures in Australia in terms of the national capital audiences are a little bit more optimistic than the numbers that were quoted, and last year we've seen a 10% to 17% increase in many of the national capital attendances, although I can't say the same in terms of the budget cuts that we've received. It's been pretty grim. My background is largely in non-fiction television and documentary making and digital media. I was head of factual programs at the ABC Broadcasting Corporation, CEO of Film Australia, and I have worked with many of the international broadcasters around the world, and I'm on the board of one of the public broadcasters, SBS. My provocation is that having come from a world of media and journalism where change has been disruptive, some might say catastrophic, the museum sector seems to be remarkably untouched. Despite a shift from collection to audience focus, we are still largely curation-led, exhibition-focused, and collection-driven. When I first moved into the museum sector, I came across a work by strategist Ross Dawson, who likened museums to media companies. And I was going to point to this slide and say, these are the areas of overlap. What he really was saying was that similar to what the Library Archives of UK was saying, that museums are the catalyst of the new economic and creative age. We're building knowledge, we're supporting learning, we're inspiring creativity, and we're celebrating identity. Well, that could be the BBC, or SBS, or the ABC. So some background to the Museum of Australian Democracy at Old Parliament House. It's based in Canberra. This is the original design of the city, and it was built to house the newly formed federated federal parliament of our newly federated nation. And from 1927, when it opened as the Provisional Parliament, it faithfully served governments until 1988, when the offices of power moved into new premises, and Old Parliament House then had a number of lives before we became the Museum of Australian Democracy in 2009 as the newest national institution. So what do you do when you're the new player on the block, when your collection is only in the tens of thousands, when your nearest neighbours, and I'm talking walking distance, are the top museums in the country? And New Parliament House, that's the big building behind Old Parliament House at the front, has the original Inspeximus of the 1297 Magna Carta. Well, we borrowed from media. We refined our purpose and our strategy, and the words bold, relevant, authentic, and dynamic became our catch cry. We used scheduling strategies refined by smaller cable networks to be noticed. We created seasons of activity. Think Shark Week on Discovery Channel, I guess. And 10,000 people came to the museum in one day to be part of our Magna Carta Festival. We focused, I think I've gone one too far, 1 second. No. Okay. I'll get the hang of this in a second, folks. Gone one too far, okay. We commoditized our approach, encouraging nimbleness and opportunism. So when we became aware that IKEA was producing a new refugee shelter for UNHCR, and yes, it is a flat pack, and no, it doesn't require tools. Just before the opening of one of our exhibitions, we were able to get one for Australia, and it became a key feature of the exhibition. And we focused on privileged access, which was the heart of what I was doing in the documentary sector. What do we have to say that's different? And so, I'm not doing this very well. And so our Menzies exhibition was seen through the eyes of the second longest serving Prime Minister. Menzies was the longest serving Prime Minister, and this image over here is our second longest serving Prime Minister with the then Prime Minister. We've had a lot of Prime Minister over the past few years. And we're increasingly looking outside the museum, collaborating with external journalists, creative producers, storytellers, and curators. Transformative experiences are at the heart of everything that we do. And as experience economy is the next big thing, we think it sits very well with our purpose. And our exhibitions and events visitor numbers have increased by 80% since I began. So hopefully we're doing something right. Today's media, though, is struggling. It's struggling with increased competition, with changed distribution models, with falling audiences, declining revenue, and that's just a couple of the headlines. When I was at the ABC, the television world had 5 channels. We regularly commanded 25% audience share and audiences in excess of 1.5 million viewers, which may not sound like much for our American partners, but for Australia it's pretty significant. This is the market in Australia today. There are 26 free-to-air channels alone, and this doesn't include your subscription options of Foxtel or Netflix, or channels that rely on advertising or sales-based options like Apple TV, Xbox, and others. And it doesn't include the 50 billion devices around the globe that are expected to be connected by 2020. One thing TV does know is audience. You live and die by the numbers, which come out daily. You're comparing all the networks and all the demographics. You're looking at today, yesterday, last week, last year. The TV networks know when you're bored and click somewhere else, what you're watching in real time, what you're watching in catch-up, how your competitors are doing. Millions are spent on research, and they commission and program accordingly. So when SBS, which is where I'm on the board, realised that our primary channel was ageing and skewed very male, they launched a channel that appealed to younger female audiences. They were able to draw to the main channel, these audiences to the main channel, and then onto the digital offering, because digital is one of our key strategies. Audiences engaging with content via our digital platforms allow us to build a picture of individual viewing preferences, and then we can tailor content specifically for the individual, sending it directly to them. When you consider the massive transformations that are taking place in many industries, banking, hotels, newspapers, and more, I found it remarkable that we in museums are largely working with the same frameworks we've had for decades, and I keep coming back to, what are we missing? Academics concur that we're notoriously inept at judging likelihood of uncertain events for a host of reasons. This is one of my favourites, Steve Ballmer's prediction that you've got on screen now, or IBM in the 40s predicting there would be the need for only 5 computers in the world. Old media relied on 2 big barriers to competition: the huge costs to establish a network and the limited free-to-air of a television licence. To a large extent, those barriers still exist. They've just been eroded by new entry points and changed patterns of behaviour. So I thought I'd share with you some patterns of behaviour from a recent survey, the Key Deloitte's 2015 consumer research that they've done that I think actually could influence us. And the 3 that they talk about, they're not quite as impressive as Elizabeth's, but that social media is at the heart of what we do. 59% of people use it daily, and that's up from 24% in 2013. And 80% of Australians have at least one account. This is the one that really shocks me. 51% believe that spending time engaging through social media is as good as being together. There's a resurgence in offline activities like live performance and listening to music. I loosely call that the analog experience, and an increase in reading. And suddenly we're prepared to pay for digital subscriptions, but only for audio and Netflix, not for newspapers and magazines. The future is unpredictable. There's a resurgence in an academic approach which they call weak signals as a way to frame strategic thinking in times of turbulent change. And for those of you who are Harvard Business Review readers, this month has a lot about that. Weak signals are things that you just kind of notice. They're not particularly good or bad, they're just there. They haven't become a trend. But people are really using them to think, how could they evolve to have an impact for the future? So my question for today is, what are the weak signals we should be looking for? Thank you.
Our next speaker is Peter White, my friend and colleague Peter White. Peter has had a distinguished career, is having a distinguished career in New South Wales, Commonwealth public sector, and is about to be a consultant. I don't know if there's a blackfella word for enfant terrible, but Peter probably gets a bit of that as well. Senior Aboriginal man, Peter White.
Thanks, Frank. Those of you who know me, I normally like to just speak off the cuff, but with 7 minutes I've sort of scripted a response, so I'll get right into it. Firstly, I'd like to make an important point that I'm not here today as the voice of Australia's First People. Any of my countrymen out there, feel free to pull me up on anything. But I'm here to share my views and insights garnered from a 26-year career in the cultural sector, a career that has been shaped as a Murray from the Manilay mob of the Gomeroi Nation. My provocation is, surprisingly or not, an extension of the previous amazing 2 plenaries. In saying that, it is an honour to be asked to be part of such a distinguished panel to share my perspectives and to throw in a few provocations on future possibilities for the museum and gallery sector. Even more so considering that there are very few occasions that Australia's First Peoples have a valued role in any broad discussion on future directions for the museum and gallery sector. I think we can all reflect on this by the evidence of the appallingly low numbers of senior Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander managers and executives within the sector. So I'd like to ask some questions for you all to ponder, which of course is what this session's all about, and I'll frame this in the context of the Australian experience. Is there indeed anything wrong with our sector? Does it need to change, and for what reasons? And the key question for myself and many First Peoples, who will be calling the shots? Because to a lot of Australia's First Peoples that have been either in this space or been watching from the sidelines, unable to get into the discussion, the big question is not will our voice be heard, but will it be valued? Okay, let me stop here and take stock, because I'm sure there are those in the audience saying, oh, it's that self-proclaimed grumpy old man who is sick of waiting and keeps on popping up at these conferences over the last few years. And I know that there are those of you out there who share our frustrations, silently voicing, we know, we hear you, but what are the answers? How can we help? And those who have that fallback position, well, we've heard all of this before, what can we do? And yes, we have heard all of this before, which is certainly the case for those of you here of a certain vintage who maybe even remember the groundbreaking UNESCO regional seminar on the role of museums in preserving Indigenous cultures in Adelaide way back in 1978. And by the way, this grumpy old man was only 7 then. The joys of iPads going off. And I'm sure that there are those in the audience who are probably thinking, isn't this guy 7 minutes up? Move on to the more important stuff. They're only 2.9% of the population, and anyway, haven't they already gotten enough? This is due in part, well, I've just gone all over the place. Sorry, I've got to pick it up. This is due in part that we have bedded down our foundations into the realm of economic rationalisms, turning a blind eye to the benefits of nurturing any social capital. So what is the answer? Simple, acknowledging that you need us First Peoples as much, or if not more, than we need you. You just don't realise it yet. People are probably asking, hang on a minute, what does this have to do with anything about the big issues? Well, the answer is that by building a new framework for the sector based on relationships with First Peoples, a new form of social capital will evolve that will be the paradigm shift for the sector. So why First Peoples? Why are they so special? Well, what other group so broadly represented in museum and gallery collections can draw on and share cultural knowledge systems that have existed continuously for millennium? What social structures have evolved through innovative and resilient responses to environmental, social and cultural disruptions? And the simple fact, because if you can make it work with First Peoples, the world's your oyster. So what does the model look like? Well, first you need the guiding principles, and to put it bluntly, the current establishment doesn't have the answers. In terms of cultural collections, custodians and knowledge holders are the experts, and therefore should be appropriately engaged at that level. To me, this means throwing out consultation. Anyone can consult, and from what I've seen from a lot of consultations, it's a lot like serving up a healthy dinner to my 6-year-old son every night. A lot of moving things around the plate, you know, the good healthy stuff, and then settling on a few tidbits, a bit of whining about, Dad, I'd really just like a slice of bread, with the finality of, no, I'm full, I can't eat anymore, and then come back half an hour later asking for ice cream. Any engagement should be initiated through a respectful approach to come up with a shared agreement of the cultural outcomes. This must not dismiss that in the case of cultural collections, members of the community of origin, whether they be custodians, cultural knowledge holders, or cultural and creative practitioners, should be leading the dialogue and shaping the outcomes. First and foremost, it's their stories, and it is with them that their stories are kept alive. Sounds like a good logo. So what's the future proposition for the model? To me, it's based on the simplicity of 4 Cs: collections, connections, community, and country. That by using the aforementioned principles, the sector begins a process of moving away from the focus of in-house exhibitions to relocating its cultural collections back into community and on country. This may sound scary to some, but it's all in the relationship. The challenge will be how communities are engaged and what are the value sets embedded within that engagement. Of course, people will also need to move past the default position, but it will cost too much to actually, how can we actually make this happen? And the outcomes, well, that's a question I will pose to the audience. Can you actually see the value? And if so, how would you make it happen? Maybe a starting point is simple: truth, courage, commitment. Or maybe we need, as a starting point, convening something in the vein of the Chilean Rhetoric report, or the South African Truth and Reconciliation Commission so we can move forward. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Albert Refiti. Albert's a Samoan man. He's a senior lecturer in spatial design at the Faculty of Design and Creative Technology, another beautiful title, at AUT University here in Auckland. Albert, over to you.
Thank you very much, Talofa Lava. My provocation really just follows on from Peter's challenge, and that is museums must embrace an Indigenous ontological viewpoint or viewpoints in the way that you work with their collections and with the communities. Really this provocation, what I've prepared here really is the why you must do that. And this is from particularly in the Pacific here, in this part of the world. Because an Indigenous Pacific ontological view of being is that the person is a woven flesh, succinctly expressed by Albert Wendt in these lines: "Inside me the dead, woven into my flesh like a music of bone flutes." This means that the person is strung and looped from a genealogical line, an enchainment of people in which the person would be seen to bud out of one another in a speeded up cinematic depiction of life. The great figure of A'a from Raurutu in the British Museum is a great example of this. A person, therefore, is the latest manifestation or model of the ancestor, a designated object of an ancestral production line. Our purpose is therefore to guarantee the arrival of the ancestors in the present, again and again in a becoming ancestor. This is a relational view of being in which objects, artifacts, spaces, places are woven together in an ecology where persons and artifacts and the environment are interchangeable. This relationship is described in Samoa and elsewhere as the va, the relational space, lines of responsibilities that cut through people and things, a relationship that also cuts through time, the walking with one's back into the future, facing the past as a classic example. And this is why the museum is such a bizarre but necessary part of this ontology since European contact. The Auckland Museum recently instigated a project that tries to connect the museum ancestral artifacts with living communities using the motto, Teu Leva. Teu here means to care, to honor, to embellish, and show off the va, or relationships. The role of the museum as the guarantor of ancestral objects, where they are stored, maintained, and suspended, is a necessary reality of a Pacific ontology of care, to keep and to honor. The word teu here has a dual meaning, that is to care for the relationship, by storing things up so that they accumulate, building layers of mana. The wrapping images motif of Alfred Gell comes to mind here. Teu also means to show off, to unfurl, unfold, and parade ancestral objects in front of the living, so that the women, the elders, the living tissue of ancestral lines can cry out, Sa'o le fa'lalele. Here comes the bright, the shining, and beautiful one. And this is a proper way for the Museum of the Future to engage their collections with the living communities of the collections, to allow communities, their artists, their poets, their ritual makers, to make the artifacts sing again, and to create a continuous ancestral becoming, to make them present in the stories and narratives that weave today's audience, so that new persons, new objects can again be budded, unfolded again from their being here with us. And that's all I have to say. And fortunately, Lisa here is a kind of a bunny aspect of this idea. I'll hand it over to her, so thank you very much.
And Lisa is indeed, I think, simply described in my notes as an artist, but more importantly, she's Ngapuhi, Ngati, Hine, Ngati, Lisa Reihana.
Kia ora koutou katoa, ko ngā tuki matawhāro o te waka, ko Ngapuhi te iwi, ko Ngaitu Rawa, ko Ngati Hine te hapu, ko Lisa Reihana ako ingoa. Welcome, and just like to acknowledge the previous speakers. I'm not going to be reading, I'm just going to do all mine off the cuff because that's kind of how I like to roll. But I'd like to thank you all for the provocations that you've put forward and feel that I'm well placed to be standing before you as a visual artist and somebody who's very, very interested in working in museums, and with that I mean art galleries as well as traditional museums. And my provocation is to ask you, all you people who are working out there, to be strong and to believe in the artists, young, up and coming, those who are still finding their voice, and others as well, because they are the community. And so what I thought I would do today is just share a couple of projects that I've undertaken with a few different types of museums, which may give you some things to think about of ways of being able to do that. So I just wanted to begin with a project called He Tautoko, which I worked with the Cambridge Museum Collections, and this is an image of a tiko or a gabled figure that was the only whakairo piece in the Cambridge collection. And he arrived with no name because he was somehow departed the shores of Aotearoa and ended up in Cambridge in the UK. So to tautoko somebody is to stand them up and to support them, and that's something that I wanted to do with this particular work. And this is an image after I'd made the work, my friend Arnie O'Neill listening into some handsets where I kind of brought him to life. I took gifts from people from New Zealand and read his accessioning notes and had them recorded into these 3 different sound devices so that people could actually mix their own sound track while looking at him. Behind him is a TV monitor where I recorded some other collection items and also some imagery from New Zealand. So this was, instead of being the thought of going into a museum and stealing him out the back and repatriating him and bringing him home with me, what I thought I wanted to do was to update this figure here and tell him stories from home and bring him gifts. So there were songs recorded, some waiata. I went to a number of different people and asked them if they wanted to update this ancestral figure with some of what's been happening in New Zealand in the 150 years since he'd been gone. So he's got some headsets on, and that's what you're seeing with him. And I've got some digital weavings in the background. Now, the way that I went about making this project is Anita Hurl was away, and she gave up her office. So that became my recording studio, and I took over this office for about 3 or 4 days and worked with the Cambridge. There was a group of women just researching in the museum, and I went down and looked at the collection items and selected them, and we would bring them up one by one, and I would spend time recording these different objects so that they could come into close proximity with each other within this artwork. So It's a beautiful kohatu, or stone that was a female stone, probably used by a female tattooist, and this was where the inks were used. It's a very sensual work. It looks like a stone from this side, but there's some very beautiful female aspects to this stone which I was working with. Actually, I'll just go back. The really interesting thing about working on He Tautoko is, prior to the making of this work, this carving might be presented in amidst a number of other Māori pieces. But once this work was made, he became an artwork and travelled the world as an art project. And so the life of this work has increased. The possibilities in the way that he can be seen and understood by audiences has shifted since the making of this work. I've been lucky enough to work with Te Papa Tongarewa a number of times down in Wellington, and I worked on a project called Mai I Te Aroha, Ko Te Aroha, From Love Comes Love. There was several components to this installation that I did, and I just wanted to pick a couple of things out, one of which was working with a collection again, and with some Māori korowai. I wanted to take these korowai and make a series of portraits with my nieces. The reason I wanted to work with the korowai was I wanted to kind of uplift the Te Papa as a treasure box, a treasure house, and so rather than taking other things into the museum, I wanted to work with their collection items and present them in a way that hadn't been seen before. So this is a korowai or cloak called Rangi Mārie. This is another cloak made with a material called Nene, which is made by Sonia Snowden, a woman from the far north. And through the process of trying to create a series of portraits with my nieces, I discovered that it was dangerous to put these objects around them. So we chose to work with pieces that were where the weavers were still alive, so I could ask their permission before I photographed my nieces in them. So this is a couple of the portraits that came out from that. And this is just an image from the opening of the museum, which happened sort of at 4 a.m. in the morning. I don't know if you Australians know that we get up really early around Matariki time, because that's a great time to open up a show. And Matariki is a very important time for us. It's a time of the Māori New Year. It's a time of recalling people who have passed on, but it's also a time of learning. So we opened up this the event, and this, although you can't hear it, there were very many women doing the karanga at this time. I'm just going to rip through, oh look, my time's up, so I'm just going to move through. I also worked on digital native portraits, working with some of the photographic collections, but I did want to talk about Impaceta Venus, which is a work that I've been asked to show a short sequence from. So I'm just going to rip through it because this is an image of Les Sauvages de la Mer Pacifique, a French scenic wallpaper with an early iPhone image, taking something from the printing technology into the digital arena. I made a work which was shown at Auckland Art Gallery. This is a scene from behind, but it went to Museum Van Loon, an earlier version, a two-screen version of that. What was great is I was able to tell them about a waka that was housed at Museum Volkenkunde, and so we used this to open up the exhibition. And so it was an opportunity of two museums to talk to each other and to have an event where I could welcome the waka, which is based on my marae from up north, and then we went zooming around the canals of Amsterdam for about half an hour. So that's what I did while everyone else was drinking wine at the opening. But it's these relationships are really important, as been spoken about before, the relationships and taking it out into community. And I think these are the opportunities that come when you bring tetchy and annoying and people that speak back beyond the collections into your sphere. So There's an image of my waka, and what I'll do is leave you with, there's about 4 minutes of the video, In Pursuit of Venus Infected.